All right. And it is the top of the hour, and it is the Trusty Huckster Mercantile YouTube channel. Welcome, because this is our second edition of the Gay History Book Club. And for February's selection on the Gay History Book Club, we are covering Love Wins, which I keep abbreviating to just say is the biography of Germ Obergefell. And at some point, I do need to give credit to the woman who actually wrote the book, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So this is tonight's discussion. So for those of you who are joining us live, you are in the right place, and appreciate you being here. And also appreciate being here now I've lost my little nifty banner I created just for you. Where did it go? I've got your name and everything. So we've got Malcolm Skip Harsch from the American Bar Association. I've got to pull up some heavy hitters here because this book got heavy. This book had a lot of facts in it, a lot of legal background in it. Most 90% of it I knew nothing about. And we probably won't get too into the weeds on some of the background stuff, but I figured the best way to have a discussion about all the background is to have a lawyer who might actually understand it. So thank you so much, Skip, for joining the show.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
A quick introduction for Skip. He is the director for the Commission of Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity at the American Bar Association, with the catchphrase? No, not a catchphrase. Helping to promote legal diversity through advocacy, education, and action. Education, something I want to be doing here with the book club. So nice little fit. Your background, I see you had a bachelor's degree from the University of Iowa. Got your law degree from DePaul Law School here in Chicago. But I also find it interesting that you interned with Lambda Legal. And Lambda Legal popped up quite a bit in this, quite a bit of the research we did, even for last month when I was working with, when we were talking about Bent. Lambda Legal pops up a little bit. So just, I didn't say I was going to ask you this, but a quick, you tell us what Lambda Legal is?
Yeah, so Lambda Legal is one of the oldest LGBTQ plus impact litigation organizations in the country. They have been one of the leading advocacy groups doing LGBTQ plus legal work. And when I say direct impact litigation, they are the ones filing cases, finding the plaintiffs, and have really been one of the main players, along with GLAAD, which is mentioned in the book, the ACLU, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, are probably the most well-known of the direct impact litigation advocacy groups.
But they're not actually related to ACLU. They're not like a subset of the ACLU or anything. Okay.
No, every group that I just mentioned are individual organizations on their own.
Okay. And so where does Lambda Legal get the funds to do and to support it? Is it a nonprofit?
I do believe they have a nonprofit arm, so they do a lot of fundraising. They have galas throughout the country. They've got a big one every summer here in Chicago, called Bone Foster. They used to have one in Michigan that was called Into the Woods. It was an outdoor one. But actually I believe it was one of their founding members. There was a large endowment that was set up early on to basically create and sustain Lambda Legal. And it is because of that, I think it was, I cannot remember the name of the gentleman, but I think he left basically most of his wealth to Lambda Legal when he passed away. And that was really what made them able to start the work that they did. Oh God, I mean, we're talking 40, 50 years ago, I think now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Great. Well, like you said, it did show up quite a bit in the book. And then as just people are probably going to be seeing a lot of lawsuits coming out in the future. We won't get into that yet. But we will talk about, this is the Gay History Book Club. And I will say, at least as a jumping off point, it is a book club. Now, what happened last month and what's going to be happening again tonight is the book club is going to be a jumping off point. If you have yet read the book, fantastic. You're probably smarter than me, because I got confused in this book. But we're going to use the book as a jumping off to understand the gay history. And for those who have not read the book, no problem. You are still welcome here. The book officially Love Wins, The Lovers and Lawyers Who Fought the Landmark Case for Marriage Equality. And it does have Jim Obergefell. So it says the landmark case without actually saying what it is. You have to kind of know what this book's about. But Jim Obergefell was the named plaintiff in the case Obergefell v. Hodges, which was the final Supreme Court decision made June 26, 2015, which effectively legalized gay marriage. So this is sort of his biography, but it really gets more into the legal aspect. And the first chapter, fantastic, very well written, very good summary of everything that happened. And what I was surprised to find out was only like a 2-year period of how this court case ended up in front of the Supreme Court. Well, then the rest of the book, written by Debbie Cenziper. What is it? Cenziper. Okay, there was a name I did not know. She is a veteran investigative reporter who has won the Pulitzer Prize. So congratulations, Debbie. But it really drifted away from the 2 years of the Supreme Court case into all the background, which led up to it. And that's, again, something that I wanted Skip to be involved with or be part of this discussion, because it's all relevant, but it got very confusing as we jumped around. So Jim Obergefell, Mary, give a really quick synopsis of at least that first chapter. So Jim Obergefell was in a long-term relationship with John Arthur, and living in Cincinnati, Ohio. And in 2013, the state of Ohio did not have had not legalized gay marriage. And in 2013, DOMA was overturned, and when U.S. v. Windsor. And at that time, he and his partner decided to get married. His partner was suffering from ALS and was bedridden at the time. And so in 2013, Jim traveled to Maryland, which did have legal gay marriage, and was unique. And the reason he chose Maryland was because it was the only state that at that time allowed only one partner needed to be present to apply for the marriage license. Every place else you had to both be there. And because he was bedridden, his partner couldn't travel. So that was why they ended up getting married in 2013. 2013, they did get married in Maryland on a private jet, medical jet they got married on the tarmac. He then came back to Ohio and met lawyer Al Gerhardtstein. I apologize if I'm slaughtering names. And was introduced to the fact that when his partner died, and his partner did end up dying only a few months after they got married, his partner's death certificate would say he was unmarried at the time of his death, and there would be no surviving spouse listed on the death certificate. And that is what triggered what eventually became Obergefell v. Hodges, is the idea that I should be able to get my name, or I should be able to be listed as a surviving spouse on my husband's death certificate, regardless of where I live, if I got married in a state that recognized my marriage. And so there's a little bit of background that Ohio did recognize marriages happen outside the state. The examples were first cousins. Ohio did not allow first cousins to marry, but if you got married in a state that did allow that, including Kentucky right next door, you could come back into Ohio, and Ohio did recognize that marriage. So they were recognizing marriages outside the state, just not gay marriage. The initial court case was to the state of Ohio, and that's where Hodges comes in, because I got confused on the naming. So Richard Hodges was the Ohio Department of Health. And it was basically the man who was preventing the death certificate from listing a spouse. The initial court case, Obergefell won in 2013 and said, yes, you will be listed as his spouse. Months after his partner died, Ohio appealed that decision and wanted to redo the death certificate. So that is where it ended up heading toward the Supreme Court. Now, 2013, so we're going to go backtrack. So 2013, what happened in 2013? DOMA got overturned. I had to admit I wasn't clear on what DOMA was. So welcome, Skip. Well, we've got the legal expert. So I did pull some notes. 1996 was where the Defense of Marriage Act was signed into law by Bill Clinton, which banned federal recognition of same-sex marriages and defined a legal marriage between a man and a woman. So can you give a little bit of background about why did that even become a law in and of itself?
That's a good question. I think it was, honestly, at the time, it was public sentiment. I think DOMA was signed into law under Bill Clinton, wasn't it?
Yes.
And
1996.
yeah, I mean, I think at the time there was bipartisan support for it. I think, again, it was the mid 90s. You know, we
Don't
were
ask, don't tell.
yeah, we were still sort of dealing and reeling with, you know, the HIV/AIDS crisis. And I think they passed it because they were, honestly, you know, I think in part it was a reaction to Hawaii passing same-sex marriage and seeing the writing on the wall that maybe there was going to be a domino effect in the states, and that the federal government needed to step in and enact DOMA in order to protect traditional marriage in the United States.
And I do have that note. So in 1996, Hawaii, and this is the way it was worded, Hawaii was the first state to recognize that same-sex marriages deserve the same equality as the rights of heterosexual marriages. So they hadn't legalized gay marriage yet, but they had recognized that they should have the same protections. And so then that's when I started piecing together a timeline. Part of it while I was reading the book, and some of it more in preparation for the discussion of the book. So, okay, 96, Clinton signs DOMA.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean, I don't think DOMA, Matt, help me if I'm wrong here. I don't think DOMA said that states couldn't recognize same-sex marriage.
What DOMA said was that no state would be required to recognize.
Right. So a lot of what we get into in the book is that no state is required to recognize, you know, other marriages from other states.
Well, the first state to legalize marriage was Massachusetts, and that was not until 2003. So that was actually in the middle of DOMA.
Right.
So yeah, you're right. It was basically, like you said, it was like a preemptive thing. So Hawaii made their proclamation saying that they should have equal rights, but they didn't legalize gay marriage in 96. They just made some sort of a statement. And that's what I couldn't figure out, because Massachusetts is credited as the first to legalize it. And that wasn't until 2003, but Vermont was the first to allow civil unions. And that was in 2000. So that was also in the middle of DOMA. So it's like all this stuff's happening while there's technically a federal law stating no, like the federal government is not going to recognize same-sex marriages, but the individual states started doing it. So 2003 was Massachusetts. The second one that legalized it was 2008. That was Connecticut. So it took 5 more years. Iowa was 2009. Vermont happened to be 2009. And then they, you know, I can't remember how many the total number ended up being at the end. I kind of stopped keeping track.
States
until
that recognized it?
Yeah. That actually legalized gay marriage. But Ohio was not part of that list.
I think it was 12.
Okay. And then one of the things that came up in the book that also got a little confusing was, and this is something you probably can explain a little bit better, because I don't remember how many there are, but Ohio falls within a district court. And so at the time that all of this was happening between 2013 and the actual final verdict in 2015, there were other lawsuits which were hitting in Michigan and also in Kentucky, and they all fall in the same district. Is that what that is?
So Ohio is part of the U.S. Court of Appeals 6th Circuit, which includes Michigan, Ohio, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And so, as they talk about in Obergefell, that when the case went to the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, they found in a 2-to-1 decision that the Ohio ban on same-sex marriage was constitutional. So those states never officially, or have not to this date, officially recognized same-sex marriage, along obviously with a number of other states, including some here in Illinois. We're in the 11th Circuit, including some of the states. We're in the 7th Circuit, excuse me. God, we don't want to be in the 11th Circuit.
Oh, you have to share on that a little bit later.
But like, for instance, the state of Wisconsin never officially recognized same-sex marriage. It was made legal through the decision of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, which ruled in favor of same-sex marriage, which is a little personal for Matt and I, because we got married in Wisconsin. Our marriage license is in Wisconsin. So that, and I know we're going to be talking a little bit later about it, but it is a concern for a lot of people that are married, that have gotten married in states that never have not yet, or never officially recognized same-sex marriage or legalized it.
Okay, that's actually something I hadn't pieced together. So in the case of Ohio, and this actually comes up, and I did find that really interesting in the analysis within Love's Wins. So when one of the many battles that ended up in the state, one of the arguments was made, and it was actually really interesting, and I actually didn't write down the name, but I think it was the Attorney General of Ohio, didn't want to defend the state. She wasn't personally against gay marriage, but her whole thing was, I am the Attorney General. This is the law. This is my job. And hey, I get that's she was doing her job. And one of the things that she said was the people of Ohio voted to prevent the legalization of gay marriage. They've literally voted to ban gay marriage. And this was prior to 2013. So the argument was made, though, and I think this was in one of the Supreme Court decisions, and they all got confused in my mind. But one of the things that got said was, just because the popular vote decides on something, if what they've decided on turns out to be unconstitutional, it's irrelevant what they voted on. So It's all about whether this is constitutional or not. So we are kind of fast forwarding to what we're going to talk about toward the end, but using this kind of as a segue to that. So you're saying that Ohio then never changed their books. So they probably still have on their books that the people have voted. They are people. I don't know why I put it in air quotes, but the people have voted not to recognize same-sex marriages. It's irrelevant because the federal government does. But if the federal government were to change that ruling, that would just it'd be the law of the land again. They wouldn't have to vote on anything.
Right. There are, and we can get into a conversation, but if it were overturned, same-sex marriage would be illegal in Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, Wyoming. There may be more, but
yeah. Okay. All right. So we're gonna put a pin on that. We're gonna come back to it, because one of the things I really felt was interesting about the way this developed was, and part of it was the focus put by the lawyer Al Gerhartstein. All of the lawsuits that he was pursuing, including the original Obergefell in the state of Ohio, he wasn't trying to make Ohio change the law. He was just trying to make small things happen. He was trying to say, hey, this guy should be able to be on his partner's death certificate because there is a legal marriage in place. You're just not recognizing it. And that is how he did originally win the first case within Ohio before Ohio appealed it. Interestingly, this jumps forward closer to 2015. I think it was either 2014 or early 2015. There was a similar case in Kentucky that involved, I want to say it was an adoption, and it was trying to get the second partner's name on the adoption paper or on the birth certificate. And the state didn't agree, had not legalized gay marriage. So said, no, you have to have only one name can go on the birth certificate, on the birth certificate of the child. And so then that argument was being used again. Nope, we're not trying to change the state's law. We're just trying to get this name put onto the birth certificate. And then it ended up ballooning into this law, as Obergefell v. Hodges was saying, oh no, it's now going to be recognized across. It never changed the law in those states. It really only happened at a federal level then.
Correct. Yeah. Well, there were a couple of cases that were joined together when the case went to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Oh yeah, I got really confused on that.
Yeah. So then
I'm like, I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah. I mean, that 2-1 decision, it applied broadly to the birth certificate cases, but then they also discussed and upheld the marriage bans that were being questioned.
Okay, so let's use an example. If, and this might be hypothetical because I'm not sure how much of this you would know. I did look for this and I just couldn't find information. So in this, again, particular case, we are talking about Love Wins, so we're talking about Obergefell. If they had lived in Maryland, where they ended up getting their marriage certificate, when he died, his death certificate, that's a state level document. So would he have been listed as the surviving spouse in a Maryland death certificate?
I would assume yes, because that's issued by coroner in the state. So if Maryland recognizing same-sex marriage, they would.
Okay. And that's a state level decision. Okay. Yeah. So the issue was because their own state didn't recognize it. So then I don't know if we can extrapolate that. So that's a state level decision. What about federal level benefits? Like, if he had lived in Maryland, would he have received same survivor benefits from Social Security? Or does that become federal?
Not federal benefits. No, federal benefits did not kick in until the Obergefell decision.
Okay, so the Obergefell decision gave federal recognition to marriages. It didn't say. But did it also then say, it must have said that states had to allow gay marriages then? So it said both?
Well, and I don't think it ever really specifically talked about benefits. It's just the case allowed same-sex marriage and all of the rights that go along with that for heterosexual couples that get married.
Okay. And then I'm going to fast forward past it because this was something I should have known about, but didn't. In 2022, Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act. And the summary I found on that said that was what officially voided the Defense of Marriage Act. So what was the Defense of Marriage Act doing between 2015 and 2022? Why was it not voided?
I don't think it was ever, DOMA was never officially repealed. It was just what's the word I'm looking for? Not superseded by the Obergefell decision.
Okay, like negated, dormant, whatever. Okay,
but Biden was, and the folks around him were smart enough to realize we need to repeal it, or we need to come out with the Respect for Marriage Act, which the American Bar Association officially supports.
Okay, well, that's good. All right, so that was fast forwarding. So if we're going back into the years of DOMA, when the individual states ended up creating the individual laws, one of the states that had a bumpy road was California, and so that got talked a little bit about in the book, and I did a little bit more research on it, and that was the legalization of marriage, but then Prop 8. Not, basically revoking that. How did that process in California? How did that mimic what was going on in the rest of the country? Or can you just summarize that a little bit about what happened?
So California, I think through a lawsuit, recognized same-sex marriage. Prop 8 was a voter. It was a voter initiative. It was a piece of legislation that was on the ballot, and it overturned same-sex marriage in California. And then that was again challenged, and that's the Windsor case. Yeah.
Hollingsworth v. Perry was what won in 2013.
Yes.
That was the one that I think overturned Prop 8. US v. Windsor was what struck down DOMA.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so the California level one was Hollingsworth v. Perry, which I wasn't familiar with that one.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that case as either, but I should
be. Yeah, I was like basically like pulling together the timeline. That one I found really interesting because it was happening right around the same time as DOMA, but there was more behind it. The other thing, and this is something that Raj had pointed out when we were discussing the timeline, the whole idea, and I couldn't find any examples of this, and you and I didn't discuss this in advance, so this may be, I apologize if you don't know about this, but the fact that 1967 was Loving v. Virginia, which basically overruled laws against mixed race marriages. And I see a lot of, I think a lot of people would see a lot of correlation between those types of laws to what we're dealing with now. Was that used, and this is what Roger was asking, was that actually used as precedent in any of these cases? Like, why was that not being like, oh, well, we did that, so why wouldn't we do it here? What's relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely used in amicus briefs.
And what's an amicus brief?
Amicus brief is it's a brief that people or organizations, law firms file to the Supreme Court in favor of or opposing the case that's before them. So people file amicus briefs in the same-sex marriage case. Arguing for the recognition of same-sex marriage. People filed many amicus briefs arguing for the denial of the recognition of same-sex marriage cases. And this happens in every Supreme Court case. The American Bar Association submits amicus briefs, not very often, but we do. And as of interest to this group would be the case that's pending before the Supreme Court right now, which is the Scarametti case, which is the trans healthcare case that's before the Supreme Court. And the ABA submitted an amicus brief in support of not recognized, or in support of basically trans youth.
Okay. And so you mentioned, this specifically is always done for Supreme Court cases. So jumping into the Supreme Court case of, since we're going to talk about the book, Obergefell v. Hodges. So that was 2015. One of the things that I found interesting, I can't remember if it was in the book or was something I just found when I was doing the timeline research. That was the first time that the Supreme Court had had discussed or reviewed a law about same-sex marriage that affected the entire country. That they'd been doing individual cases that were state-based, but this was the first time since 1971 that they were actually hearing a case that was nationwide. And what, as you said, there were people who were both pro and con, whether it's going to happen or not. And so the final decision on
June 26th.
Obergefell v. Hodges ended up winning and passing, but 5-4. So I thought that deserved a little bit of research and to figure out like what exactly did that mean. So I have for it was Kennedy, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, and against Relito, Thomas, Scalia, and Roberts. And I went into the details of it turned out that all four, and I don't know if this is normal or not, but all four ended up writing their own dissent. So there was like the official dissent, but then they each also had their own. But in almost all four, at least 3 of the 4 cases, what they really were saying was that they weren't saying that gay marriage shouldn't happen or whatever. They were saying that it shouldn't be at the federal level, that this should be at state level. And so it kind of starts bringing to mind, and not something I really want to get into, but does that kind of fall along the same lines as the decisions about Roe v. Wade? That it just doesn't belong at the federal level, so we're just going to let the states deal with it.
Yeah, that is the argument that is often made by Supreme Court justices, one side or the other. It is not uncommon, but it does not happen a lot that each dissenting justice writes their own dissenting opinion. Oftentimes, the justices will sign on to one dissenting opinion, or if they differ in their reasoning for, for dissenting, then they'll write their own. So it was significant that they each wrote one.
Okay, but that just explains one of the things I didn't understand, because in each of the dissents, there was a note that said who also, like, and it didn't say signed it, they used a different term, but in some cases there was another two names attached to it. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. You already wrote your own dissent. Why are you on this one? So they could agree, basically you're agreeing to somebody else's dissent. It's like, oh yeah, I believe that too.
Yes. Correct.
Okay. So there was a lot of cross agreement in the dissension, but basically they all pushed it down to state level. And I want to be sensitive to your time. So I appreciate you giving this. So then one of the things I really did want to get to, we put a pin in it earlier, is what does things look like now? We just mentioned Roe v. Wade. No one thought that could ever be overturned, and it was. It's not that big of a, based on some of the things that have been happening already during this administration, that there could be some changes and some challenges made to here. So I did some cross-referencing. So of the 9 justices on the Obergefell v. Hodges case, 5 of them are still on the bench. Sotomayor and Kagan are the only 2 remaining that voted for it. And 3 of the dissenters, Alito, Thomas, and Roberts, are still there.
Yes.
So then that brings us with the 4 new ones who've technically never voted on that. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett were all Trump appointees, and Jackson, who was a Biden appointee. So based entirely on who they were appointed by, which may or may not dictate how they vote, because Kennedy was a Republican and he actually voted for Obergefell v. Hodges. So we can't just generalize, but let's. So if we went that way, this could be overturned. So, and again, the dissenting votes, everyone said, they all said pretty much the same thing, that this was just not that we're against gay marriage. It was that the states would have the right, or should have the right, to determine it for themselves and not be federally required to recognize another state's marriage license. So you started talking about that before. So what would that mean? Particularly in these cases, like you just said, which I had not considered, if states have never actually taken laws off their books.
So, sorry, what's your exact question? Just like
what would happen in people that were married in those states?
Well, first of all, it's speculative. We don't exactly know. It would be very complicated to negate marriages that have already happened. So one of the things that a lot of us, say is that they probably won't strip you of your marriage. They just won't recognize same-sex marriages in that state moving forward.
Well, not to cut you off, and you may not know the answer to this, but based on that, what you just said made me think about it. We just talked about what happened in California. So, and this is something Raj had mentioned earlier. So Governor Newsom, I think it was, in 2004, started doing legal unions, and then Prop 8 ended those. Did those unions, were they no longer legal?
I don't think Prop 8 applied retroactively either.
Okay. So it's just, that just meant they couldn't do any more, but it didn't necessarily undo anything that's already been done. Okay. Gotcha. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to make sure I understood that.
Because yes, so that would be a logistical nightmare. But unfortunately, there's a lot of uncertainty. What would happen though, and what is pretty clear, is that states that would not recognize same-sex marriages, we're reverting to state control. And I think what we would see is an impact on what we talked about earlier, is the loss of federal recognition and federal benefits and rights. So tax benefits of being able to file jointly, Social Security benefits, if we still have Social Security, for spousal benefits, survivor benefits would be affected. Healthcare decisions would be affected, and inheritance rights would be affected. Those are the things that I think, would really would have a huge impact on same-sex couples that are married.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier that you and your husband were married in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You said, so what was your editorial on that regarding that?
Well, so if Obergefell was overturned, the legality in same-sex marriage could conceivably revert to the state's previous legal framework. And Wisconsin in 2006 passed a constitutional amendment, which could potentially be reinstated, which explicitly states that marriage is between one man and one woman. Wisconsin, I feel like probably, it would probably, there would probably be immediate legal challenges. You know, Wisconsin, like a number of other states, I think the public sentiment is that it, is strong enough where, they would try and recognize, they would do everything that they could to try and recognize same-sex marriage. But, like the immediate effect is that it could become illegal again. And we just, like I said, we don't know we don't know for certain what would be all the negative consequences, but for us, it's like a real thing that we sort of have to think about and maybe decide to get a marriage license here in Illinois.
Interesting. So even though Illinois may recognize marriages from another state, if your marriage is from a state that ends up having a constitutional amendment, but that would only be if it was retroactive.
Yeah. So,
okay.
I mean, I don't think it's something that keeps us up at night.
Right. Which I think is coming from a lawyer, that's good to hear. It's one of those cases like, yes, it's a possibility, but maybe it's not a probability. And, so it's not quite this sky is falling. This is something that came up in the Obergefell book, which I was really interested in. And I wasn't going to talk about it, but what you just said made me think about it. I want to say, because I wasn't planning to talk about it, I don't have my notes, but I want to say it was in Kentucky. It was in definitely one of the states that was part of that district court, that there had been a court case about, I think it might have been the adoption, that the state lost and the attorney general made the decision, and the statement was made at the time that we see what the state is, we see where the country is going. We see that this, that there is a desire for, this to become legal. And so we are not going to challenge the decision. And it was the governor of the state who then hired outside counsel to appeal it on the state's behalf above the attorney general. So
was that Ohio or was that Kentucky?
I want to say it was Kentucky, but I could absolutely be wrong. Could have been Tennessee.
Yeah.
Somebody in that district, because it was related.
I remember reading that too. So
yeah, and I want to say it was tied to the adoption, but it was definitely related. And it was kind of like a passing thing. I'm like, whoa! The attorney general doesn't even want to pursue this, and the governor's doing it anyway. So here, like, I'm a very big believer in we can only control what we can control. So we cannot control the Supreme Court. We have 4 years before we can do anything about changing a president, but we only have 2 years before we can talk about changing congressmen and congresswomen, congresspeople. And then there's also local elections in there. In a case like that, whatever state that ended up being, who do we need to, who do you have to influence? That seemed to be the governor was the one that took it upon him or herself to just rush, go through, this is what we want, this is what the state wants, even though the attorney general didn't. So you don't want to replace the attorney general. Who do you replace? Who do you vote for?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta change the hearts and minds of your elected officials, which is the governor down to individual state houses and senates. I mean, but it's your question of who do you vote for? Well, vote for people that are pro same-sex marriage.
Yeah. And then is this a case where, because I always have a question, there was a lot of push the last couple of weeks, call your congressman, call your senator, being in Illinois, we have Democratic senators. So it's, it's like, okay, our senators are already going to hopefully be doing what we want them to do. Is this a case where that people should still be calling their senators to let them know that, hey, they're still, even though we're the majority, we're still pretty vocal about it?
Yeah.
How would a governor know if they got elected that there's what the wellspring is below them?
I mean, you flood the phone lines. They have to record your, tell them what you're calling about, what you're in support of, and they have to make note of that. And, and I think it's still important that even in a state like Illinois, you're contacting your, our senators, Durbin or Duckworth, or your representative, letting them know that you support, the actions that they're taking, because they need to know that that the public opinion in their state is on their side. And the only way that they really know that is by flexing your constitutional right to reach out to them and tell them how you feel about things and what you want them to support.
Absolutely. I didn't even plan to get political there, but hey, it just kind of landed in our laps. Again, I want to be sensitive to your time. Was there any thoughts that you had in reading the book, or anything that we haven't covered already in the development of Obergefell v. Hodges?
I think the book for me just made me sort of reflect on my own journey in the same-sex marriage fight, because I never really thought too much about being involved in it. But like you mentioned, I interned at Lambda Legal. And I interned in 2007 when the Midwest office of Lambda Legal was working on the Barnum v. Breen case, which went to the Iowa Supreme Court. And on summary judgment, the Iowa Supreme Court backed same-sex marriage in Iowa. So for me, it's really been a personal journey, and just being part of that. And I know that they mentioned Pat Lowe's name early on in the book, who was at Lambda Legal for many years before becoming a judge, and unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But I had the honor of being able to work with Pat and other folks in Lambda Legal that summer on that case. And my job was preparing one of the expert witnesses, George Chauncey, who is, I don't think, mentioned in Love Wins, but he's somebody that has been an expert witness in pretty much all of the LGBTQ plus cases that have gone before the Supreme Court, either written testimony, expert witness. And then after that, I helped the ABA, before I became an employee, as a member volunteer, helped the ABA's resolution supporting same-sex marriage pass through and become policy. So reading this book really just, it made me appreciate, all the work that went into passing same-sex marriage, but, also where we're at now, which is a scary time, and we don't know what's going to happen. And, there is a potential for the Obergefell decision to be overturned. But there are a lot of people out there that are going to continue to keep fighting for LGBTQ plus individuals. And I am just honored that I get to play a small part in that.
Yes, and thank you for the work you do with the ABA and with the commission that you're the director of. And again, thank you for all of you who joined us. Again, we were talking about Love Wins, biography sort of Jim Obergefell. And that was our February selection for the Gay History Book Club. And do a quick plug for the March selection. In March, we will be covering the Celluloid Closet. We have not picked a date yet for this discussion. it'll probably be the end of March. Don't know if I'll have a guest for that one. It might just be Raj and me, or he may not know that, so it may just be me. But again, Gay History Book Club, there is a book version, but what might make this more attainable or achievable is there's also a movie which is based on the book. And so I think a lot more people might be able to follow along in the movie and have some good discussion points. And it is talking about homosexuality on the silver screen, predominantly in 30s and 40s cinema. So celluloid closet, homosexuality in the movies, Vito Russo. So pick that up, and I will be announcing the date again, probably toward the end of March, to give everybody a chance to read that. And once again, I want to thank you, Skip, for joining me from the American Bar Association and your great insight on the history of Obergefell v. Hodges. And thanks for those in the chat. So really appreciate everyone joining your time. And thanks for your time. Thanks for putting your trust in Trusty Huckster. And we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.